Hello and welcome back to my channel, or hi if you're new here, go ahead and click that subscribe button. This is my hot chocky chats, and what I like to do is just sit down and have a chat with you while I have a hot chocky.
Hot chocky chats. We're gonna chat and have some jockey.
Yeah, we are.
And it's hot.
So hot.
So
hot.
Ooh yeah, this is a mocha, so it's a hot chocolate but like a mummy adult version with 3 shots of coffee. So in today's episode of Hot Chocky Chats, I wanted to talk about my birth stories. Now, if you don't know, I have 2 boys. I have a almost 8-year-old and I have a newly 3-year-old. You're probably thinking, well, how are you going to fit in 2 birth stories into one video? Well, it's pretty simple. With my first pregnancy, Nixon was breech basically the whole way through. He never turned around. When you have a child that is breech, you basically don't have many options as to how you can birth. You can do weird and wonderful things to try and make your baby turn. You can also get the doctor to try and manually turn the baby for you, but that just seemed quite invasive to me. So I kind of just left it up to fate. What was going to be will be. And I had a C-section scheduled for 38 weeks and 6 days on a Thursday in the morning. The thing that bummed me out the most, aside from like not really having a choice as to whether I could birth, especially being my first child, is that I wouldn't go into labor or feel contractions or have that experience. So I had a little chat to my tummy and I said, look, if you're not going to turn around, can you at least like just come when you're ready? I was really worried about when you have a C-section before like the 40 weeks before, you know, your cooking time is done. I was worried that there could be an issue. Anywho, so fast forward, it's now Thursday. I'm 38 weeks and 6 days pregnant with Nixon, my first. And I wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and I go to the loo and I do a wee, and then I get up and there's a little gush. My water's just broken. And I've gone back to bed and said to my partner, hey, I think my water's just broken. And he's like, don't be silly, just go back to bed. I was like, yeah, right, yeah, okay. So I've hopped back into bed, rolled over. Another little gush. I was like, okay, I think this is the real deal here now. So I got up and I thought, I'm gonna have to go to the hospital because he's likely still breech. I'm gonna have to go and have a C-section. So I got up, left my partner in bed. I went and had a shower, went and washed and straightened my hair. I did my makeup. Like, these are things you do when your water's broken, right? And got all the hospital bags ready, and it had probably been about 15-20 minutes since this started, and I started contracting and I had contractions, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, right, because sometimes your water can break and labor won't start, but labor had started basically straight away for me. So I called the hospital and I said, hey, my waters are broken. I'm actually booked in today for a scheduled C-section as my son is breech, but I'm actually contracting. And they said, no worries, just get your stuff ready and come into the hospital. Anywho, I basically start contracting every probably 10 minutes after that. And we're on the way to the hospital and we get a park that's, you know, a little bit of a walk away from where we need to go. Meanwhile, I'm holding a towel like underneath me like a nappy because I'm still leaking. And I'm walking across the road to get to the hospital and I have another contraction and I've like stopped. I'm like, ugh. And my partner's like, come on, like, come on. I'm like, ugh. And he's like, come on. I'm like, ugh. They just don't get it. Anyway, so got upstairs, they popped me in a bed, they monitored me, they did a scan to check if he was still breech, which he was. The little little man. And so I had to have a C-section, which sucked. Anyway, they just left me there to labor because, you know, they can't just like whisk you off to surgery. They have to wait for surgeons to be ready, for a theatre to be open, etc, etc. So they're like, you're fine, baby's fine, you just sit there, relax, and we'll let you know when we're ready. Some time goes on, it's probably about an hour, and my contractions start sort of ramping up. They're getting a little bit closer together, they're getting a little bit more painful, to the point where I'm like, I can't lay down in this bed any longer. It is excruciating, it is hurting me. And they're like, oh, it's kind of prompted the nurses to have a look at me. Anyway, they're like, oh, we're just gonna check you. I'm like, okay, no worries. And they checked me and they're like, oh, yeah, we should probably go down to surgery now and get this baby out of you. So I'm not quite sure. They didn't tell me how dilated I was. They didn't tell me if like his foot was hanging out. Like, they didn't tell me anything, but they just seemed, once they checked me, they kind of like rushed me down to the operating theatre. I got a spinal injection, which is really scary. You're not allowed to have your partner there, obviously. So first time mum, first pregnancy, getting a big needle in my back. I was crying into a pillow holding a nurse, and she was doing a great job comforting me, that's for sure. And then I got set up on the table, they got me all ready, then they brought my partner in and he sat down, and before you know it, they're like, get your camera ready, and out popped our baby. And he was born at 6 in the morning. Yeah, 6 in the morning. It was around 6 in the morning, I think. Oh God. Wow, yeah, look, it's been 8 years almost. I feel like it was around 5 or 6 in the morning. So it was a pretty short time from when I woke up at 1 in the morning to when he finally came out. And yeah, everything went smooth, everything went great. The actual C-section itself, the operation was fine. But back then, 8 years ago, they take your baby away from you while you're in recovery. I didn't have him in recovery with me. That was really hard for me because I've just had this major surgery. My first child has just come into this world, and then I wasn't allowed to see him until your spinal had gone, I think, when I could move my legs again, and that took ages. It probably took an hour or so. I was in recovery all by myself with not my partner, not my baby. And yeah, so that was really hard for me. I got really anxious. They had to give me, I'm pretty sure they had to give me a Valium to calm me down because I was having like a panic attack. I was getting really angry. I was like, I want my child, where's my child? And eventually I ended up getting back to my room before my partner. And my partner wheeled my brand new baby into the room, and I remember just thinking, get the hell away from my baby. That baby is mine. Give it to me now. And yeah, spent that whole rest of the day with baby on me. It was beautiful. Now, that was my first experience. That was my first birth story. It's pretty like, doop, doop, like this, done. There's your baby. Now, for my birth story of Zaid. So it had been almost 5 years since I had Nixon. My chances of having a Vbac, which is a vaginal birth after cesarean, was good. Like, especially considering that the reason I had a C-section was because he was breech. It wasn't anything that went wrong during labor. That's just the procedure these days. You've just got to have a C-section if they're breech. I only have one big hospital around me, and I had done a lot of reading. Even when I was pregnant with Nixon, I had done a lot of reading about what type of birth I wanted, what my birth plan was, the coping mechanisms that I was going to use for labor. I looked into hypnobirthing. I read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. I read some great books. Some really great books about natural birthing and unmedicated birth and everything like that. So I felt like I had a lot of knowledge and I felt comfortable going into a VBAC. I was happy to do that. My hospital, however, even though this was my second child, it had been 5 years since my first C-section, they just didn't have a great mindset about VBACs. They just really weren't pushing it. They were really quick to say, oh, you know, you can have another C-section. Oh, we can book in another C-section. You can have a VBAC if you want. Like, it wasn't really encouraged, which I found really unsettling, considering there was absolutely no reason for me to go and have a second C-section. The only issue with my pregnancy was that Zaid's head was in the 100th percentile. So he had turned down, he was in a great position, or so I thought, but his head was massive. And I remember getting a scan because I was measuring 2 weeks ahead, and this was around 34 weeks, and my midwife was like, oh, you know, we could try and induce you. There's a lot of rules surrounding induction and medical intervention when you are a VBAC, so they don't like to induce you to put pressure on your cesarean scar, even though it had been 5 years. But they have some like rules surrounding what you can and can't do if you are a VBAC, like constant monitoring. You're not allowed to have a water birth. You can't even like labor in a bathtub. You probably could now. What has happened in the last even 3 years, you probably could do these things now. Like, the hospitals are getting more progressive. Yeah, I just didn't really feel like I had a team behind me that was like rooting for me to have a VBAC. It was kind of just like, yeah, I guess we'll let you try and do that. Anyway, moving on. I get to 40 weeks. It's my due date. I have a midwife appointment that day. He actually checked me and he said, oh, you're fully closed, your cervix is still high. So he gave me a stretch and sweep to try and help things along. And I was really like trying to get things going. And now that I look back in hindsight, I kind of wish that I had have just let it go, because I still had about 10 days before I had to worry, right? But I did try everything. I started diffusing clary sage oil. I started Hand Express. I was having hot food. I was walking heaps. I was doing all the things. In hindsight, as a person that was attempting a VBAC, I wish I had have just let my body do things when it was ready. And instead of doing those things, like go and get a massage where I was properly aligned and my body was ready and things like that, and just doing stretching and yeah, better preparation could have been had for sure. So the stretch and sweep must have done something. I get to the following day, we go do groceries. I'm big as anything, got a huge belly. I'm in between like walking a lot or resting, relaxing as well, because relaxing is a big part of what brings your oxytocin level out. That night, I'm sitting on the couch and it's about 10 o'clock at night and I start getting the niggles. And the niggles are those first few pains that you get that are really similar to period pain, but you can still feel your uterus contracting. And I'm like, oh, okay, we might be in for something tonight. This is excellent. So I went to bed, tried to get a good sleep, and I was mindful that I was getting these like period cramps and niggles. I woke up at 1, so I didn't sleep for very long, and I woke up at 1 in the morning and I was like, ugh. It was uncomfortable already. I got up and I had a shower, I had a hot shower, and I just tried to relax and I tried to get back in bed. But I was really excited. I was excited that things were progressing. I woke Tim up and I was like, I reckon this is it. Like, I'm getting some good contractions happening. By 3 o'clock in the morning, oh boy, my contractions are a few minutes apart, probably ranging from like 5 to 7 minutes apart. They're lasting for about 40 to 50 seconds, not quite a minute yet, but they were painful, really painful. And in my mind, because I'd not given birth naturally before, I thought, oh, I must be getting quite close because, you know, they say to go to hospital when your contractions are 5 minutes apart, lasting a minute, and they're uncomfortable and you can't stand it anymore. So I'm getting to this point and I'm thinking, geez, this is going quite fast. This is great. We call Tim's sister to come look after Nixon. I call my midwife and he's like, yeah, you know, I think you should stay home. I don't think you're there yet. I'm being very, very vocal with my contractions. Like they're really hurting quite a bit. But I listen to him. I'm like, yep, you know, obviously he's a midwife. He knows, he can tell. I get to 6:30. So another 3 hours later, they're 5 minutes apart. They're lasting a minute. I'm in pain. I'm like, surely he's got to be coming soon, surely. I ring my midwife again. He's like, okay, come on in, we'll check you, we'll see what's going on. So we get into the hospital and it's about 7 o'clock in the morning, and at this point it's been from, you know, little niggles, but from 1 to 7, it's been 6 hours of some pretty decent contractions, but definitely since like 3 a.m. they've been coming like every 5 minutes and being quite uncomfortable. Get to the hospital. They do start to chill out a bit once I get to the hospital, and I was like, oh, great. But hoping that I still had some progression. So they checked me, checked Bub, he was all good. You're only 2 centimeters dilated. Cute, love that for me. And again, in hindsight, looking back, to me that says he's probably not in the best position and it's taking him a while to come down if it's painful. And possibly because all of my pain was in my back, in my lower back. It felt like someone was stabbing me with a hot knife every time I had a contraction. Nothing was in the front, it was all in the back. So again, hindsight, he's probably posterior and it's taking him ages to come down because of his big head and not in the right position. But anyway, let's just keep torturing myself and I'll go home and continue laboring. So I went home. Tim at the time was coming out of like a pretty bad flu, and I'm so lucky this was 2018 because had that been today, he would not be allowed with me at all. He was like not well. He goes and has a sleep. He's been up all night with me. I try to relax as well, get my hot water bottle out, put it on my back. I sat down on the couch for a bit. I tried just chilling out in between contractions, and then every time I'd have a contraction, I would walk up and down holding my back, just digging my nails into the pit of my back to counteract the pain, and just looking around and just trying to be present with things like, I just walked 10 tiles. These tiles look like terracotta tiles. No, now look at the walls, they're cream. Now let's look at the skirting. Oh, the skirting's white. Geez, that skirting looks great. This is what I'm thinking about whilst I'm contracting. So I'm walking up and down doing this. At this point, my contractions were coming every like 5 to 10 minutes. They weren't consistent, but they were just as painful the whole time. Like the pain basically from 3 a.m. was the same pain throughout. I didn't have like a slow build up to something really painful. Like it was just, it was probably like a 9 out of 10, right? So the whole day goes by. I somehow managed to deal with laboring like that all day. I have no idea how I managed to do that. Cue that evening. So 12 hours after we were at the hospital, I finally go back in. My contractions are 5 minutes apart again. They're lasting a minute, sometimes even longer, and they check me. And I'm 4 centimeters dilated. So it's taken me over 12 hours to get to 4 centimeters dilated. And they finally admit me and they're like, okay, we're gonna have a baby. I'm like, oh, thank God for that. Well, you know what happens after 4 centimeters, right? The pain increases. Once you get to that, 5, 6, 7 centimeters, it gets really, really painful. And because I was a Vbac, I had to have like constant monitoring. I was fine walking around. I was good if I could stand, swaying, doing all of that. But then they wanted to, I don't know, check me again or something. I don't know. I just remember laying in the bed, and laying down just hurt because it was all in my back. I was like screaming at this point, and I had a doctor here and a doctor here, and it was the shift change, and they were discussing me while I'm here like screaming. And anyway, one of them touched my belly, the one that was leaving, and I just like swatted him away. And I was like, don't touch me! Don't touch me! The poor guy. Oh man, I felt so bad about that later. And I'm laying there and they're discussing things, and they're like, you know, your progression is really slow and we can't give you anything for the progression. My midwife is like, okay, do you want to get a C-section? Like, we can take you down there now. This can all be over. I called my mum and I was crying. I was like, I've gotten this far. Like, what do I do? He's taking ages to come down. This labor's taking forever. What do I do? You know, I'm just crying because my goal is a VBAC, and the finish line for me just seems so far out of reach. And I'm only like 4 or 5 centimeters at this point. And I'm really I'm so defeated. I'm so tired. It's been such a long day. It's almost, you know, it's been a day and a half. I agreed to go down for a C-section. And once I agreed to that and made the decision in my mind, I was like, yeah, I feel good about that. That's fine. Like, as long as baby's here and he's safe, that's all that matters. We get to meet baby, great. And this is about 7 o'clock at night. An emergency surgery had come in. So I had to wait, I think it was around 9 o'clock by the time they were ready for me. And so they've put me on the bed, and on the way down to the operating theatre, I'm like screaming. I am making guttural sound. My obstetrician, who was a lady that it was her shift, she's like, I'm just gonna check you, because she's obviously heard me, and what sounds to her like this is probably transition. We're probably at a really good point right now in this labor. So we've gone from one block in the hospital where the birthing suite is, we've gone all the way down through the hospital, down like 4 levels, across to another building where the operating theatres are, and they've gotten me in like the room before you go in. I'm about to go for a C-section, and she's like, I'm just gonna check you because you're screaming. I'm just gonna check you. Anyway, she checks me. She's like, you're a 7, almost an 8. She's like, do you want to keep going? I was like, yeah, I want to keep going. I've gotten this far. I'm almost there. And suddenly I just had this burst of energy like, yes, I'm almost there. Anyway, back up to the birthing suite we went. And we get up to birthing suite. My midwife is like, okay, here's the plan. I reckon we break your waters. This is gonna push things along and get things going faster. And from all that I'd read, once your waters are broken, contractions hurt even more. At this point, I'd had no pain relief. I'm in excruciating pain. So the thought of that getting worse, I was like, no, please, no. If we're gonna do that, I need an epidural. We order an epidural and we break my waters. 10 o'clock at night. So it had been a full 24 hours since my little niggles had started, and I finally got an epidural. Oh, sweet baby Jesus. Oh my God. What a relief that was. 20 hours of contractions every few minutes to just having relief was just undeniably heaven. It's just amazing. Then I was able to lay down. They sort of propped me up so I still had sort of some gravity on my side, but I laid down and I was able to get some sleep. And they're like, we're just gonna leave you and we'll come back at 4, I think they said. And she came back and she checked on me and she said, you're a 9, almost a 10. You're almost there, but he's still a little high. And I was like, great, that's fantastic. And she's like, we'll come back and then we'll start pushing. In the mind of every VBAC mama out there, that's just what you want to hear. You're almost there and we're going to start pushing soon. I couldn't believe it. I was crying. I was like, I can't believe I got through this whole day and a half and I'm almost there. I'm almost there. And then I've fallen back to sleep, you know, just relaxing until I gotta get this kid out of me. And then all of a sudden, the monitor starts going on, beeping, beeping, beeping. The midwife that was in the room, she's looked at the monitor, she's turned on all the lights, she's called for someone. There's a million people in the room. I'm thinking, what the hell's going on? I look at the monitor and Zaid's oxygen levels are crashing, just crashing. And I've looked at Tim, he's looked at me, and we're just petrified. Absolutely petrified, like something's gone wrong. And the obstetrician comes in and she says, we need to get this baby out of you right now. Can you try a couple of pushes for me? So I do a couple of pushes and she's like, he's too high. He's too high. We need to go for emergency C-section right now. I was like, okay, whatever we've got to do. She's like, we just need to get this baby out and we need to do it safely. And the way she spoke to me was so comforting and firm. I was like, yeah, whatever we need to do. Whilst they're stressing about all of this, in my mind, I'm thinking he's coming through the birth canal, but he's squished because his big, fat, massive head is just too big and I'm squishing him somehow. So I think to open up my legs and open up my hips, and I was still able to do this even though I had an epidural. I was still able to kind of like move my legs, opened up my hips, and his oxygen went straight back up. And I was like, oh my God, thank God, because the way it was going, they were gonna have to like put me under. She said, look, you know, he's fine now, but he's still really high and he's obviously getting stressed and squashed coming down. Do you still wanna go for a C-section? I was like, yeah, let's just get him out. Let's just get him out. You would think the journey would be coming to an end. It's now approaching mornings, probably about 5 in the morning at this point. They take me down to theatre and I'm in the little room before you go in. And it's shift change time, isn't it? So we're waiting on the doctors, Tim's outside waiting. And when you get a C-section, like whilst you've been in labor and you've already got an epidural, they just top up your epidural. I'm having a chitty chat to the anaesthetist and we're talking and he's topping up my epidural and we're having good old banter. Good old banter, and poor Tim's probably been waiting maybe, I reckon he was probably out there for a good hour and he was like crying. He was crying because no one was checking on him, no one was telling him what was going on or why it was taking so long. He thought we'd probably gone in and died. Yeah, so he was having a rough old time out there. Anyway, they finally get me in to the theatre. I get on the table and I joke to the anaesthetist. He's like, you know, if you start feeling anything, just let me know. I was like, yeah, we'll have a safe word, pineapples. Jokingly, of course. Tim finally comes in, so pleased to see me. I look like I'm about to die because I'd gone without food for about 20 hours, probably more. And I've been having contractions for most of that, and yeah, I just looked rough. Then they do the C-section, they pull out our baby. He's bloody massive. He was only 8 pounds, but his head was huge. So our baby's here and it's beautiful and everything's, oh, finally, like there's some relief, thank God. And Daddy's cuddling baby and he's on me and it's amazing, and he got to stay with me. Prior to my C-section, I had quite a large dermoid cyst and it was about 5 by 5 centimeters. They picked this up during my scans during my pregnancy and they said, if you have another C-section, do you want us to remove it? And I was like, well, you're already in there, you may as well go ahead. So once they had gotten Zaid out, they then went to do the removal of the cyst. And whilst they're doing this, I start feeling stinging. And it's hurting, and so I look over to my anaesthetist and I'm like, excuse me, pineapples, should I be feeling all of this right now? So he's trying to top up my epidural. I'm like, nah, I can still feel it, it hurts. So my epidural is wearing off, well, I'm cut right the hell open, and they're digging around and they're looking for this cyst, and I'm like, abort. I said, just forget the cyst, stitch me up, get me out of here, please. And they're like, look, we're gonna try to do a local anesthetic in the area, and if that doesn't work, we're gonna have to put you to sleep. And I am just freaking the out. Like, I am freaking. If you know me, I get anxiety around a blood test. And here I am cut open, feeling it. My baby's just been born. I've been in labor for about 30 freaking hours, and I'm about to go under and miss those first couple of hours with my son. Brilliant, love that for me. Luckily, thank you, the local works, and I don't feel anything. And they stitch me up as quick as they can and get me out of there. Oh boy. When I say I've got some medical PTSD, I have got some medical PTSD. And when I was pregnant with the baby that I just lost, the thought of having to go through a Vbac or a C-section, like either way, I'd break out in sweat. I would just break out in sweat. So I was just gonna labor at home in the shower and just like call an ambulance, because I just don't want to deal with neither of that. It's almost enough to stop me from ever having another baby, because that was just horrendous. It was horrendous. Anyway, congratulations, it's a boy. And we get to recovery, and Tim's with me. My baby's skin to skin on me and having his first feed, and life is beautiful. They gave me a Zupa Duper, like an icy pole. Oh mama, that was incredible. Absolutely incredible. And that, my friends, are my birth stories. I need to have a lie down after going through that again, because I'm breaking out in sweat and I'm feeling very anxious. I hope you stuck with me through that journey. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the births of my boys. Comment below if you want to know what recovery was like for my C-sections. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. My analytics tell me that only 30% of you that are watching are subscribed. So 60% of you need to just click that little red button down there for me. Support my channel so I keep doing this. And let me know what you want to hear next in my Hot Choccy Chats. Sounds good. See you then.